everyone. Welcome or welcome back. I'm Simon. I'll be your host for today's session on how viruses and phishing attacks can compromise your Salesforce data security. Before we get started, do let me know in the comments below on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in your ability to recognize phishing attacks? So 1 is I'm not confident at all, wouldn't be able to tell real from fake, and 10 being nothing could get past me. I can recognize phishing attacks 100% of the time. I think I'm probably around maybe 3 or 4 on the scale, which I'm sure Ben would be thrilled about if he is tuning in right now. But whilst you're popping your answers in the chat box and comments section, I will get started. So I'm sure it comes as no surprise that today's session is on viruses and phishing attacks based off of that question earlier, but data security might feel a little bit less than glamorous, but it is arguably one of the more important aspects to the success and longevity of your organization and its data. And despite Salesforce Architects playing a crucial role in the security of their Salesforce instances, many are still unaware of the threat of these attacks, which can oftentimes be extremely complex and lead to severe consequences, not least stealing of your data. In today's session, we will be covering viruses and Salesforce, where you are vulnerable, how phishing attacks occur, building data security mindsets, and then a few resources before jumping into the Q&A. But this session will be led by Matt and Steve. So Matt is a Salesforce CTA and CEO and founder of EzProtect, and Steve is a Salesforce CTA as well and MVP. I will leave you in their very capable hands now to impart their security wisdom and hopefully instill you with some more confidence RE data security. I'll pop back in for the Q&A, but for now, do enjoy the session.
Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate the intro, and it's great to have Steve here with me for the session. First thing, I think everyone might be wondering who I have right here. So we've got Cody. He travels around with me wherever I go. I'm in Asia right now, and he's holding a virus because he's trying to protect everyone from viruses. And today he's not just doing coding, so he's kind of my little travel buddy here that we're going to be doing this session. So anyway, so let's move on to the first topic here. I think she did a really great job there. So we'll just move on to the big, the big aha moment. So I'm going to go back a little bit of history. So I am the co-founder of EzProtect and Salesforce CTA. I'm actually wearing my uniform right now, CTA shirt underneath that you can't see. But I went and I presented at Cactus Force about a year and a half ago that where Steve helps run with over in Phoenix. And I presented to everyone about, I asked them a sort of simple question. Did you know that Salesforce does not scan for viruses? But the bigger thing that was interesting, the people that I asked was, why should you even care? And the interesting thing I found out, though, doing that was no one could really give me a straight answer. Everyone understands that viruses are bad, viruses can do things, but people really don't understand what they can do, what kind of damage they can do. So I after presenting at multiple different shows around the country and world, I ended up getting enough information and really understanding what the thing was that really mattered. And it's that's the second bullet here. And it's bring it down to very simplistic terms. Viruses help bad people steal your data, which can cost you a lot of money. So here I'm going to move on to the next topic here. So is just thinking about the cost. And this is what people don't really realize. So there's an IBM report out there right now that they release a study every year about the average cost of a virus. And a single breach can cost up to around, on average, on average, $4 million. And that's not in the US. In the US, that goes up to about 9 million. But then it can be a lot more if you think about some of the other things out there. You have GDPR that have some very huge fines, other governmental fines. You have legal fees. And then if you think about long-term costs, what does it cost your company if you lose customers? And there's a metric going out there, depending on the industry, that as much as 30% of customers say they will leave a company through the breach. So let's just make that a little bit lower. Just say, what would it cost your company if 10% of your customers left? How much money would you be losing? Then how much money would it cost you to get new customers? What's your cost of acquisition of a new customer? And then on top of that, you still need to fix your reputation. So now we're talking not 4 million, not 9 million, but depending on industry, it could cost you upwards of 100 million or more to repair all the long-term after effects. It's kind of like an earthquake that hits. You have that initial earthquake, then you have a few other of the aftershocks. And this is some pretty hefty aftershocks, and usually the aftershocks actually what causes all the damage. So,
you know, it's
I don't know,
interesting.
Steve, if you had anything to say on that as well.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Enjoyed Matt and I have known each other for a number of years, and proud to be a CTA with Matt. It's interesting. I've been in the IT industry for many years, and I remember when viruses have been almost around for as long as network computers have started to become tied together. And they started out just kind of almost as negative vanity projects where people would build these things, just releasing them in the wild so they could go and cause damage. And, those hackers, those virus writers would just want the personal satisfaction of causing damage. But what's really interesting is the way they've been kind of weaponized. They've been weaponized to attack, and they've been weaponized to penetrate and gain access. So they have become less of just an anonymous virus trying to cause trouble, as they are a tool for people who want to get in and get things, get access to your system and create those ransomware attacks. So they have become focused tools, and we need to, and that's what we're after, is these, how can we stop these focused tools, which are being in the hands of both bots who can be attacking you 24 hours a day, to even in very targeted individuals who are studying your system and figuring out how they can penetrate it. Simple attacks used to be things like a buffer overrun, stick too much text in a field, and then the system would get an error, and then at the end of it, stick in a little bit of code, like delete all your records. So it would cause a buffer overrun and then trigger a SQL command. Now they've become very, very focused, and they come in almost all forms. So that's what we're really talking about, is nefarious people using targeted tools, attacking you on every which way they can, looking for any vulnerability.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I remember when I was in high school, I remember seeing there was the very simple viruses back then. Some of them, like the Pong virus. It was just this annoying little thing that would bounce up around the screen. You couldn't get rid of it. Or like you said, just viruses doing damage, like just erasing your hard drive. But now, as you mentioned, viruses are a lot more complicated, and even the attacks are a lot more complicated. And we're going to talk about a couple of those. There are multi-phase, multi-stage types of attacks that can get quite complex, that people can do to cause a lot of damage. So we'll kind of move on to the next slide here. So I think that before we dig into, I think the next best way to talk about this is, where are you actually vulnerable now? Because I think that's what people care about. I think that this is something that I like to talk about too, is, just because, I think from well architected, so I know you're a well architected ambassador, but I firmly believe that it's the right tool for the right job, and it's really understanding the risk. And because just because everyone says you need MFA doesn't mean you need MFA. It just depends on what are you trying to protect, where are you vulnerable, and what are your risks. And I think that's where it's really important to understand for this is, where are the most vulnerable areas, and then how the next part would really be, how do you solve those risks, right?
Yep. And you're as a solution architect, technical architect, we're designing business applications, deploying them across the enterprise, and we're not putting nefarious, bad, we're not putting vulnerabilities in there, but we are allowing users to give us things, and that becomes the source of this. If we say that, hey, I open a case, give me a file, like an attachment, there's a vulnerability. That file is now a potential, what we'll call, threat vector. Now, you could have internal users that could be using your system, and you really hope that they're using, let's say, a company laptop. It has virus scanning, it has protections, but they could have been breached. So internal users could have, may or may not, they could be going to a home computer, logging into their business and not realize that somebody previously to them had gone to a nefarious website and opened them up and downloaded bad content. So we have internal users that could be on unsafe computers. We could have external users that could be on unsafe home computers, or we could have those bad actors who are pretending to be external users, and then they are just examining your system, looking for ways to inject these vectors of attack.
Yeah.
So just and then, or it could come where you have the bots just perpetually bombarding your system, looking for opportunities.
Yep, very much so. And I believe there's a metric out there that actually says the biggest threat to your organization are your internal users. Not that every one of your internal users are malicious, but you might have some that may be a disgruntled employee that knows too much and is technical enough to do some damage. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you want to limit access. Then you also have, like you said, users that could maybe have had their system be compromised. Is not every virus scanner, even on corporate laptops. I've seen customers that are customers that come in that have corporate laptops with a corporate virus scanner, and they use Salesforce email to case, and an email comes in through their corporate email, and that scan for viruses comes into Salesforce, and then a virus made it past the corporate firewall and the corporate email scanner. I've also seen where internal users upload files into Salesforce from a corporate laptop that have viruses as well, that have some malware and so forth. So I think it's kind of educating people that you need to be aware of all of these different entry points and not have your blinders on. Just because someone has a virus scanner doesn't mean it's going to be effective. I think it's kind of like, I love analogies going back to, let's say, I've been traveling Europe, as you know, for the past year or 3 months, and I visited a lot of castles. And a lot of the castles have multiple walls, multiple layers of protection, multiple gates. But there's no one gate that's always 100% effective. So the more gates you have in front of it, the better protected you are with it. And I think the same thing's true about virus scanners. Yes, desktop virus scanners are good. You should have them. But also you should make sure that every system where those files are coming in, try to get it at the source, at the entry point. If the source doesn't work, then you have your backups. And I think that's kind of the mindset that people should have when they're looking at these things.
Yep, and these attack vectors, tools that are used to penetrate, they could be targeted, looking straight at you, and that's what we'll go into in the next couple of chapters where they're targeted. They could be general, where they're just coming in general. And the purpose of the multiple layers is if you get hit with one form of attack, then you want a different layer that may have completely different mechanisms of security. So that way you can have these layers and stop those attacks. And so you're talking about internal users who might be good users, but on a computer they didn't realize was penetrated. They might be disgruntled users who, as you mentioned, are the most dangerous ones, those that know more information about your system than anyone else. You might have external users on polluted computers or nefarious users pretending that are just attacking. So you've got to think the gambit from good intent but bad computer to bad intent to a complete assault. And we're looking at, once you build an application on Salesforce, what are some key elements that allow those potential vulnerabilities to enter your system?
Yes, that's exactly right. And the one thing I would like to say here is that from what I see, the highest risk threat vector, though, are your digital experience sites. That's because that's coming from users that you may not know or even trust that are coming into your system and uploading files. So in one example could be you're a bank and you're taking loan applications. Sometimes it's a self sign up. So anyone, even someone being nefarious, could sign up and pretend to be making a loan, upload some files, and it has a threat, and they're using that to do an attack. Others, you have people that are using Salesforce in an unauthenticated users, which I have my book that talks all about that. And those users could be uploading like submitting cases, like an email, like a case submission. Usually, a lot of times you don't want to have any types of any kind of some authentication because you want to have that available to everyone to submit those cases. Well, now you've opened up to the entire world those files. And then the last thing I'll put to the digital experience, which goes to more what I talk about in my book, is that just because you don't have a file upload button on the UI doesn't mean someone can't inject those files into Salesforce. Because all the APIs that run on Lightning are accessible by anyone that has access to those APIs. So an unauthenticated user has access to all those APIs, which means they can do, if you give them access to do so, they can upload files, they can insert records, update records, delete records. So there's specifically a box in Salesforce that says do not allow guest, or I think it says allow guest user, do not allow guest users to upload files. So that is a really safe thing that you should do, because otherwise an attacker that knows what they're doing could actually upload files without ever touching the UI in Salesforce. And then secondarily, I would say, and then we can move on from here, is that authenticated users are even a little bit worse, because authenticated users, you can't stop from uploading files in Salesforce. There's no way to prevent them from uploading files. So because they're licensed in Salesforce, right, everyone can upload their own files. And so again, someone that does a self sign up that is now authenticated could actually upload files using the Lightning APIs without ever touching a UI. So anyway, let's move on to the next slide here. Get that one to us. So I think the next thing is we want to move on to is talking about phishing attacks. So I think just a little bit, we'll do a little bit of background of what is a phishing attack. Seema talked earlier asking what was your awareness of phishing attacks. I think a lot of people know, but just in case, phishing attack is where somebody sends you an email or sometimes a Word document message with a link in it. But that link looks to be harmless in many ways, but you click on it and takes you to a website. Maybe it looks like your bank asking you to log in, or your email application. And now the attacker has gotten your credentials. Other types of phishing attacks can be a lot more dangerous and doing multiple different layers of attacks. Some of them are trying to basically get you to go to that link to download a file that could maybe be in a ransomware attack so they can get into your network. So there's a lot of different ways that people can do. And there's other types of phishing attacks, such as they call like spear phishing. Spear phishing is when they target you as an individual or a company specifically, and they're doing multiple attacks from multiple different ways. Sometimes they're calling you on the phone, making friends with you, getting your email, getting you to give information about the company, and very, very heavily targeting you as an individual or your company with getting the trust saying that you're from their IT department or something like that, just to get your information so they can send you those emails so you can click on those links and then they can execute attack against your organization. And Steve, I don't know if you have anything else to add on
Yeah,
that.
in the past, I've been part of an organization in the US called InfraGard, where we work with the FBI and protect against attacks. And there are documented cases where nefarious actors will do what's called social research to look at a company, determine who their executives are, decide how they're going to attack them, learn about them, and then also look and simulate attacks. And I'm sure all of us have seen, you get that text message from your CEO, which says, "Hey, I need you to go buy, some, coupons or gift cards." And I've even got those from a past company I was working with. And so they will study a company, find the individuals, and then create attack vectors that seem to come from either subordinates, peers, or even, their bosses asking. And the key element is asking for you to do something. It's usually got an immediate need. Can you click this? Can you do this? Can you send me this? Take a look at this invoice. I've seen, my Netflix account so many times. My Netflix account has been, needs to reset the billing. And you get these email accounts, and I'm like, I don't have my Netflix account on this email. So you just immediately know that they're wrong. And in these corporate trainings you're taught to look for misspellings, look for, links, but now they could be almost picture perfect. So if I get a call, a link of anything that comes to me that requires a need that asks for my credentials, the answer is no. I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call you back.
Yep.
So
I mean, I think it's like a lot of people are too trusting these days, I think, in some ways. So if sometimes you get this phone call and it says, we're calling to you donate to this cause, and then you give people, a lot of people just give their credit card number over the phone to a stranger. And I think that's kind of the thing. You really should take a little bit more. People need to take a little bit more of a, unfortunately, distrustful attitude towards the information that they share with other people. Same thing with, like you're saying, with social. It's amazing what you see that people publicly put on social. Like my Facebook account, if you don't know me or not a friend of me, all you can do is find my name. I've completely locked down because there's so much information that people can find about you, your friends. They can do, if they know your friends, they can say call you and pretend you're one of your friends. They know a lot about you because they saw all the posts you did and say that they need money. And then you might do that, or maybe, like you said, your boss's boss. And now LinkedIn is now becoming bridging. It used to be very simple. Now people are sharing a lot of information on LinkedIn about what their job changes, they get a promotion, even some projects they're working on. And it's amazing the kind of stuff that you see that people even share on LinkedIn that someone could use. So I always be careful what you're sharing out there, because someone can easily get to it and then use that against you. Right?
And one of the key elements why we're having this conversation on Salesforce Ben is that this attack can come in through the myriad of ways, from SMS, emails. But what if they get it in through a community, a digital experience? What if they submit a case with an attachment, and now the people think Salesforce is secure? They've uploaded this document, this loan application, and the internal agent clicks the link. They have just clicked an unverified link. So once it goes into Salesforce, these attack vectors, these potential dangerous items could look valid. They could, and internal users could click them and cause them to activate.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of real stories that have hit the news where that's happened. I think even Salesforce support recently had an incident where a support agent clicked one of a phishing link and was able to get some, I don't think these were credentials, but they were getting some private information from users. I think there was also one with Okta and some other companies out there. Don't quote me 100% on that, but I do remember several news stories. It's just all that happening all the time. It's very common. And the attackers are getting craftier and craftier on what they do. I actually got an interesting email yesterday. It was actually a different type of scam, but it was someone who said they were a lawyer that looked like it was legit, from a law firm, saying that I was a beneficiary of some long lost relative that had passed away, and they couldn't find anyone else, and I had a matching name, so I was the next in line. But they first needed me to click a link to enter a lot of my personal information and my credit card to pay some taxes. And now that they're basically doing two things with that attack. First is, of course, getting your financial information, but also getting all of your personal information so they can use that, put it on the dark web, and get into other systems. And that might be personal, but also, let's say they made that connection to you in Salesforce. Maybe they're trying to attack you from a personal side, but they know you work for this company because they saw you on LinkedIn. And then they attacked you to get your personal information. And now they have more information that they could to do attack against your company. So, all right, let's move on. We've got a couple scenarios here. I'm just going to run through them really quick because I know we've been spending a lot of time on these slides. But this first one is a very interesting phishing scenario that I ran into. So the way that the story goes is a woman, she had her cell phone and she got her text message, and in that text message it said, "Thank you for signing up for your new service." But she was like, "That's very weird because I didn't activate anything new on my phone. That maybe they made a mistake." So she kind of went on her business, and then all of a sudden she realized her phone was pretty quiet that day. She didn't really get any calls, any texts, and then she went to place a phone call, and her phone didn't work. And then she was like, "Oh, that's not good. Something's going on." So she calls the phone company up, and she's like, she said, "Yeah, didn't you activate a new phone yesterday?" You walk, this actually happened in the store. I mean, they checked the ID. The ID was right, and we switched you to your new iPhone, whatever. And then she's like, no, that I didn't go to the store. And so what's happened was someone went in with a fake ID, had her personal information, and switched to a new cell phone. But this is not the end of the story. Remember, we were talking about how these attacks can get quite complex. So then all of a sudden, she went to use her credit card, and her credit cards were, like she couldn't use them. And then she logged into her credit card site, and there were all these charges on her credit card that she didn't make. And once she finally got her phone reactivated, she got a bunch of texts from the bank about if this was fraud or not. So what ended up happening was the attacker first went in and switched her cell phone, already had her credit cards, started using the credit cards. And when the bank started texting her about if that's fraud, the attacker already had a phone and was saying, no, not fraud, not fraud. So now let's take this to another level. Imagine this is your Salesforce environment, and someone did the same thing. They targeted an employee who had maybe an administrator or maybe someone else with higher level access, and they got their phone. Then after they got the phone, they started trying to log in, and they get the two-factor authentication via SMS. This is why SMS is not a very good way to use two-factor, because there are a lot of ways that someone can spoof. They don't even need to, sometimes they don't even do your phone, they can just clone your phone. So I think this is just one interesting story here. I don't know, Steve, if you have anything to add on this before I move on to the next story.
Yeah, I would agree that our kind of a weak point in the whole multi-factor, multi-factor is something you know, which is like a password, something you have, which could be an ATM card or your cell phone, or something you are, biometrics. And we know how hard biometrics with fingerprints have been to do. But on the two-factor, something you have, we know that people have put skimmers to skim the bank cards as they go into ATMs. And now, the hackers, the threats have detected that the phone companies themselves are a vulnerable link in the chain. And as you say, we need to be very careful with our phones. We need to be very careful what would happen if they were breached, and what would they gain. So we need to start thinking about our multi-factor and how we could A, recover from the loss of the phone, and B, what if the phone itself becomes vulnerable. So yes, multi-factor is only as strong as that additional factor which we brought into the
Exactly. And it's one other thing that just came to mind too, you just sparked a memory, is also being very aware, and you see this in your security awareness trainings, of who's around you, where you are, what you're saying in public, what people can see in public. Can they see your screens? Can they see other things? I remember one time I was on a plane, and this guy was ordering something online, and he just starts telling them his credit card number on a plane of 200 people. And everyone's just kind of looking around like, did he really just do that? Now imagine you're doing other things. You're talking about company secrets. You're talking about other things. I mean, anything that people can hear in a public area, they can use against you, and they can use that to breach your system. And I know there's even more sophisticated attacks where attackers will follow people they know that are prime targets, wait for them to go to a public place and see what they can gather about them, doing that social research against. All right, going to scenario number 2. This is something that that happened recently. This is, I think, it was a news article that was released around July 2nd about this. I don't know the exact date that this happened, but this was actually a phishing attack where someone targeted a Patelco Credit Union, and one of their employees had clicked on a link that had a phishing URL. Well, as we talked about again, a lot of these attacks are very complex and multi-phase. So the phishing attack wasn't just a phishing attack; it was an attempt to get someone to download some ransomware. And so what actually happened was the user who clicked on the link downloaded the ransomware, and then that ransomware locked out all of their online payment systems for over 500,000 members. This meant people were in lines to go to ATMs to withdraw money, do deposits. None of that was working. The online banking wasn't working. So people ended up going into the branches to try to get their money to make deposits. I read one thing on the news article about this guy, one of the senior citizen who was trying to deposit his Social Security check that was his only form of income, and the check was not depositing. They were having issues, and they were told, well, you need to go talk to the federal agency about this, which really, I don't know if that makes sense. So this has some real impacts on real people. So I mean, it was basically, I think here was over 10 days that everything was down from this ransom, all because of a phishing link that someone clicked on. And it looks here like the potential loss was around 9 billion in the managed assets that they manage from a day to day. Not saying that they lost the 9 billion, but if that was worse, the attack could have gained access to their bank wire systems, to customers' credit card numbers. There's a lot of stuff that an attacker could have gotten access to with all that information that they got. So, and I think one of the other reasons they were targeted, because they were seen as an easy target, unlike government agencies and some other larger enterprises that are more locked down. So I think security is not just a thing that for the large companies, even the small banks, the small credit unions, the small hospitals. There's actually a metric out there that says 60% of all small businesses will go out of business after a single attack within 6 months. I mean, we talk about big numbers with the large enterprises. Well, they can afford that kind of money and not go out of business. But a small company, if a small company got hit for $1 million, got hit for $4 million, they're out of business, right? So I don't know, Steve, if you have anything before we move on to the next.
No, I agree. It's a definite threat, and the threats come from all directions.
Yep, for sure. All right, so we're going to go to the next up and talking about how to build a data security mindset. And there's an very nice quote that I like to talk everywhere. And Steve reminded me earlier before the call here that he was the one that told me this. But Salesforce is a very secure platform. I mean, until the day you start configuring it, which is very true. I mean, Salesforce is secure. They have a lot of controls in place. But if you do not configure it appropriately, then you could have a data breach. And that's exactly what my book is about, that I keep talking about as well, that if you want to go find it, it's Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences on Amazon. And it talks about a customer that had a breach because Salesforce was not configured appropriately.
Salesforce has so many tools and capabilities of what you can do. And a developer or even a configurator could just get a requirement. Hey, I need to have a store locator, and show me, put on a public way to type in a zip code, show me my stores. And then the developer sees a list of your accounts that are your stores and go, oh, I'll just query these stores and show them. But you don't realize that you may be querying the name and the address. But if you were to inject some what's called SOCL injection, you could grab additional fields. So maybe you shouldn't be making all your stores visible to all anonymous users. And so what may seem like the right decision in the short term could be a major vulnerability in the long term. Should they have instead had a different object of just public stores? But then there's maintenance and overhead to that. So what might seem like the right decision to solve a business need could open you up to a significant security vulnerability.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the things we've talked about before too is so many people think of security last, or it's kind of more of an afterthought, where security really should be first. And that's why the Salesforce well architected first pillar is secure or trusted, right? And that's why you should be thinking about as the very first thing. I've seen people that have maybe they have some security requirements, but they're very, very light. Your security should really be thinking about, you should be thinking about getting your security personas. Who are the people? What are the people? What can they do? What should they be able to do? Also thinking about, what are your anti-personas? What are the people that might be attacking you? Those should also be a consideration, which I don't remember any project I ever worked on where they had anti-personas, which I think everyone should, because you should be thinking about, what are you protecting against, but also what should the people that you are developing for, what should they be able to do, right?
Yep, I think that's very good. And so, yeah, the Salesforce well architected. I've been happy to be a well architected ambassador. We go deep into all the different capabilities of Salesforce, but there's still choices. They are choices that your developers and your architects need to make. Should I use this mechanism A or should I use B? And what am I protecting against? So you need to be keeping these concepts. And I really like your idea of having those kind of the personas in your system. What should a guest user see? And they should see absolutely nothing else. What should an internal user do? And all the things they shouldn't do.
Yep, exactly. And even thinking about like, I'm really big on, I love marketing, and marketing, you always have personas, buyer personas. But I've rarely seen when project teams have user personas. You have a whole persona card and saying, okay, these are their habits. This is where they hang out. This is where they do. This is what they should do. Also think of an attacker. What is the attacker? Where does he hang out? Where is he trying to attack you? What is he trying to do? Going deep, thinking about all the areas where you could come under attack. And that should also be taken into account into your security. And I got the thought because, I mean, well, Arc is big on the anti-patterns and patterns. Why shouldn't there be personas and anti-personas as well, right?
Yep. So these are great things. These are some great tips. We're moving into like more of the actionable items. Really look at your well-architected, know the mechanisms. Your file uploads for guest users. You need to look at the scenarios. If you have a single business need to upload a file, should you be enabling it for the guest users? By doing that, you're opening the door to a whole set of potential vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And remember what we talked about earlier is like, I mean, as soon as someone says, yes, we have an unauthenticated user uploading files, that's a red flag for me immediately. It's not saying that you shouldn't do it, but there's a lot of precautions you have to make before you should roll that out. And think about, remember we talked about earlier that those lightning APIs. And once you enable that for the guest user, the attacker doesn't need a user interface. They can use APIs and common tools like Burp Suite or others that attackers use, and they could upload malicious files. So imagine this: if you have a case submission system, and instead of flooding your system with all these files, maybe they're a little bit more sneaky. Maybe what they do is they create cases that look legitimate with a legitimate ask, but they put links in it and they put files in it that are malicious. And it's only a few, but it's enough to get one of your users to click on and do some real damage to your company. So I think that's one of the things you need to think about. Well, how do we stop those kinds of things from happening? And what's the risk of that happening? Are we a bigger target for that happening? Maybe we should have a different business process set up first so we can make sure that these cases are valid. There's a lot of things. Maybe Einstein might be able to be used in the future for something like that. But I think it's just making sure you understand your risks. You're thinking about that before opening that floodgate. And also remember too, from the files, is thinking about those authenticated users. So if you have self-sign up authenticated users, that's actually worse than a guest user because you can't stop them from uploading files. Also, the licenses themselves give them the ability to do more things than a guest user. So just the pure licensing is also something you need to think about. And so we're talking more than just the files here, is the data access, all the things that they can do with these APIs, and even with the user interfaces that you design. So you need to be very intentional on how you build them, and thinking about how people may take advantage of them as well.
And jumping into sharing rules, I love teaching classes on Salesforce security and sharing, and need to be very aware of your external sharing model. Pretty much lock it down and be very careful. Global search gives you the ability to scan across all objects that the profile might be enabled to. So it's this combination that you call out here: the sharing rules, preventing sensitive data, and really locking down, especially either the guest user, only the bare minimum, and any external profiles. Really, all user profiles, only give them the bare minimum of what they need to do their job because of those vulnerability capabilities.
Exactly. And then the next one here I'll cover is, because this is actually very close to my heart right now, is minimizing how many profiles and permission sets groups you have, but even more importantly, making sure that you're not having all bunch of overlapping permissions. So because the problem with that is, imagine it's a maintenance first is the hard part, because you have all these permission sets. How does the admin know what permissions they're actually assigning to people? And they're going to have to take a lot of time to do that. The second part of that is difficult is understanding what their actual permissions are actually granting. So if you have a lot of overlapping permissions, all these complicated different profiles, it's possible the admin might be assigning the wrong permissions to people, or too much permissions. And I'm going to give a shout out tomorrow. There's another Salesforce Ben that's going to tomorrow actually talking about this exact use case here about permissions, profiles, permission sets, and showing, and I'll be one of the guest speakers on that as well. So you should tune in if you haven't already signed up for that one. And of course, the last one, as we've been talking about on here, if you are have files uploaded, or even if you open up some of those floodgates, you really should implement some kind of virus scanning solution and URL scanning solution. There's a lot of ways, as we talked about, that you can't stop people from this stuff coming in. So you just need to make sure you're protected if it makes sense for you. So, and I think we can kind of wrap up really quick because we're running out of time. But the last, I think this is the last slide here. Let me just check. Yep, last slide is really cleaning some things you should be doing to clean and validate the data in your environment and the settings in your environment. The first thing is you should understand, of course, how, as we talked about in the beginning, all your threat vectors, how files could enter Salesforce, how URLs could enter Salesforce, where people are putting URLs, removing or locking down on those unnecessary entry points, like the guest user, making sure that you have not enabled uploading files as a guest user if you don't need to. Another thing is when talking about the record ownership. So Salesforce had locked down the guest user, I think it was a couple of years ago or so, or maybe a little bit longer, so the guest users couldn't own records. But what they didn't do was they didn't remove the ownership from those guest users to those records. So one thing you should do is make sure that no records are owned by the guest user, because if they are, that means they're publicly exposed for everyone on the internet to get. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to take a couple others on that one.
Yeah, no, and just really watch your security, watch the privacy, watch the visibility, and just go for the minimum and do those negative searches, like global search, searching for things, because Matt brings up a very good point. Some of these APIs may not be on the UI, but nefarious actors can peel the user experience apart and look for ways to call functions that might not be visible. So just because it's not on the menu navigation doesn't mean, a nefarious actor can't potentially attempt to call something. So you must have those Salesforce security lockdowns in place to prevent it.
Yep, exactly. And then I think we both would echo this one, is security is everyone's responsibility in the entire company. I mean, it goes from the top down, bottom up. You should always be thinking about security first, because it just takes the weakest link in the chain is what breaks the chain, right? So you should always be conscious about who has access to your data, how you're designing for it, even, and as we talked about, those bad actors that could be taking advantage of what you've designed.
So back in the days, I used to go to a website and you'd say like customer, and it would put in the URL 1234, and I would go, well, what if I change the URL to 1235? What if I go in and just do URL hacking? And I saw software that had no way to prevent that. Those were the old school days of simple, but now you need to realize that these hackers can sit there and do view source on your HTML, your JavaScript, and just run scans to hit things. So you just need to look at every level of security, have that layered security approach.
Yep, exactly. So, all right. So I think we've hit the end of the presentation, the slide deck. We have a few resources here for you and I believe the deck may be shared out as well. So if you could, go look on LinkedIn, follow EzProtect, we'd really appreciate it. We do weekly security updates, tips that are very helpful on your security beyond.
Matt, we can't hear you, I think.
Fantastic. So yeah, definitely hit these resources. So we've appreciated sharing with you. It's been an honor to work and share these resources. And you definitely want to look for ways in which you can protect your system. Remember, it's everyone's responsibility.
Yep. Looks like I was muted somehow. So sorry, apologies. But last but not least here, if you're concerned about the security or anything that we talked about today, you can book a free security assessment for us. There's no cost to you, and we can see if it makes sense if you even need a virus scanning solution, or maybe there's some other tips that we can give you to help make sure your data is safe. So, and I think that's the end of the presentation. I think Saima, there is one question that I would like to pose to the audience myself. How many of you actually knew that Salesforce didn't scan for viruses? Would be number one before you saw this presentation today. And how many of you actually truly felt you understood, I would say 1 to 10, the risk of a virus that would enter your system?
Amazing. Whilst we wait for the audience to answer that, we had a couple of questions that came through whilst you were speaking. I'll get started with those. So the first one is, how should I configure digital experience sites correctly?
I think that's hard to answer on a call, but I kept mentioning my book a few times on here. I actually have a lot of great tips on how to best practice for digital experiences, and maybe if you can put that into the chat. It's just book.mattmeyerscta.com. And you can go and sign up and get the book, and then everything in there should answer your question. But I would say a general answer to your question right now would be kind of re-echoing what we'd said earlier. Just understand what you're sharing, what data you're sharing, what your guest user has access to, what your authenticated users have access to. Looking at your code, looking at your Apex, what classes, what methods have been shared out or accessible to those users. Are using Aura, are using web components. Web components are much more secure than Aura Lightning components. So those are kind of would be a starting place.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next question is, how can I connect MS SQL with Salesforce CRM?
It's an integration question. So yes, if you're having an external SQL database, there are different integration mechanisms like Salesforce Connect and other mechanisms, but you definitely need, if you're going to have a direct connection from Salesforce to your SQL server, potentially cloud-based, you want to make sure, look at what credentials you're using to make that call, and definitely watch out for things like SQL injection and potential vulnerabilities. So you can definitely set that up
on the Apple chain too.
Yeah.
I think there's probably quite a few solutions for that on there too.
Amazing. Any more questions for Matt and Steve? Fab. If there are no more questions, I think I'm happy to wrap up if you are.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for a fantastic session, and also a huge thank you to everyone in the audience for your questions, and also for tuning in as well. I hope you all understand the importance of security now, and also the fact that it is all of our responsibilities to sort of uphold that as well. But before we wrap up, Matt, Steve, any final thoughts to share with our audience?
Just been a pleasure. Enjoy being on Salesforce, Ben. Enjoy working with Matt, and just keep learning, all of you, to stay on your journey, learning the different mechanisms. And when you're asked to do something, to add a feature, add a function, there should be the flip side, not just can I do this, but also should I be doing this? And if you do get asked to reveal some data and you have a concern, that should definitely escalate it up and say, I have a concern of why I'm potentially showing this data. So it is everyone's concern, not just can I do this, but should I do this should be a good question that you wrap into your software development.
Yep. I think, Steve, you took the words exactly out of my mouth. I mean, I think that's the thing I always preach, is thinking about what is the risk to your organization. And just because the business asks for it doesn't mean you should do it. Or even just because the business asks for it doesn't mean you should do it the way they want to do it. I think the 5 whys is something I love talking about, where you have it usually takes at least 5 questions to get to the true thing that someone actually wants. And then you can truly understand what they're trying to achieve. And then you can think about the security implications of that and the user experience together, not just exclusively separate.
Perfect. Thank you both. Well, yeah, no, thank you once again. And thanks everyone in the audience as well. That wraps up this session. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully see you soon at our next LinkedIn Live.
Or at Dreamforce.
Or Dreamforce. Yeah. Amazing. Well, bye everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.